Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this spotlight session. We've had two very successful spotlights focusing on sponsorships, and not surprising to have this third one, which is a follow up, given that most brands' represents the second largest marketing communications investment, with media being the first. Spending on sponsorships globally continues to rise. On an average, about 17%, starting from 10%, going right up to 30% of the marketing budget store is spent on sponsorship right fees. I'd like to start with introduction since I'm pretty new to the WFA family. I know a lot of you know Laura and have either spoken to her or interacted with her on email or maybe even met her in person, and are probably wondering who's this new face and name here. Laura is away on maternity leave and I'm going to be filling in for her. My name is Simran Kulkarni, and I'm on the left. And my role at the WFA is to provide support within the area of marketing procurement. And together with my colleague Hannah, our global events manager, we're going to make sure that this webinar is run smoothly. Thank you, Hannah, for your support always. As it's customary, starting with an introduction, a few slides to give an introduction for those who are less familiar with the WFA. We are a not-for-profit organization, membership organization. We've been around since 1953, so 67 years. And since then, we're representing the interests of our members. As you can see on the screen, our members are mainly brand owners and represent over 125 multinational companies. A few of the members that have joined us this year are Walmart, Kraft Heinz, Huawei. So if you are on this call, a big welcome to you. And some of you may not know as well, but we are very, very proud to have 60 national advertiser associations in the membership that you can see on the screen now. Today we can see around 63, 64, yeah, 63, 64 members, and a huge warm welcome to everybody. We've had two sessions on sponsorship, like I said, and this session is a follow-up of the two sessions that were also led by Lumency last year. These were fully dedicated to managing sponsorships and experiential marketing initiatives during and after COVID. All of our content is available online. The link is right here, and even the recordings are available. If you have not seen the content, I really encourage you to have a look because a lot of what was discussed in the two webinars is still very valid and relevant today. How to manage a dynamic sponsorship portfolio consistently, how to ensure each asset is effectively evaluated when renewing or acquiring, measuring the impact of sponsorship on measurable brand and commercial objectives effectively and efficiently, evaluating lost value from existing sponsorship deals, what properties may be slow to recover. So I won't go through each and every one of the bullet points on the screen, but essentially a lot of content that is even relevant today. So please feel free. We really encourage you to go and have a look. The sponsorship category is really all about maximizing our investment. The category is about efficiency, measurement, and ROI. And in today's spotlight, our guest speaker from Lumency will provide guidance for what brands should be focusing on and be aware of as we move towards a post-pandemic world. Key influences on sponsorships for 2021, including the rise of local, what existing trends in sponsorship have accelerated due to the pandemic, how to make up for lost value from 2020 and 2021, what to expect from evolving consumer sentiment around live events, and how should deals be structured going forward. You know, we conducted a survey some time back on brands' response to COVID-19 crisis, and it's we saw that the channel investment was down all across. TV was down 33%, radio was down 35%. There was slightly lesser decline in online displays and online video. And the biggest hit was the events and experiential budgets. They had the biggest cuts. It's no surprise, therefore, that we have a third session focusing on sponsorships and how to effectively manage this post the pandemic. Very delighted and very happy to welcome our guest speaker from Lumency today, pardon me, Ian Markham. Ian is no stranger to those who've attended the previous two sessions, but for those who are joining us for the first time, Ian is the president and CEO of Lumency, a brand side only sponsorship, experiential, and content consultancy. Thank you, Ian, for coming back, and a very, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Simran. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to be back with you at WFA for another conversation about sponsorship. Thanks to Rob, Laura, Hannah, and Simran for the opportunity to be with you all today. 2020 was an unusual year, including for sponsorship. Canceled, postponed, and delayed events of all kinds, live, virtual, stadiums and venues without fans. Thankfully, 2020 is behind us, but the pandemic will have a lasting impact on how we should be thinking about sponsorship over the short and the midterm, and in some ways over the long term. So let's talk a bit about where to from here. We work globally, across 21 country markets from bases in New York, Toronto, and Chicago, with plans to open in Amsterdam last fall delayed, and a dream for a base in Sao Paulo sometime soon. Over the last 5 years, we've evaluated over 3,000 sponsorships of all shapes and sizes, from Olympic and FIFA World Cup rights to local community festivals. We touch about 1.6 billion euros in annual rights fee spend. We're in a bit of a paradox moment in the pandemic. We're in what is arguably the darkest stage of the public health crisis, and yet we have more light in the tunnel in front of us than we've had in months. Depending on where you sit by geography, it may be between 15 and 18 months between normals. The impact of this pause on how we engage with consumers and how the pause has impacted how they live their lives going forward, at least over the next 1 to 3 years, is significant. Let's first consider consumer mindset and how it impacts your sponsorship investments. And Hannah, if we could flight poll question number 1, please. When will we return to more normal when the coronavirus public health issue ends and is no longer a concern, in your opinion? And here we are. So most of the people in the audience are anticipating Q1 of next year before the pandemic will be no longer a concern. Thank you so much. One of our research partners tracks consumer sentiment across 39 country markets for us. This data came out of market on December 17th, the data on screen, and shows not when public health experts or government officials believe the pandemic will be over, and not marketers or market and procurement professionals and no longer be a concern, but when consumers believe it will be over. We'll see updated data this week that came out of market on Sunday, but with vaccines now rolling out globally, we expect the consumer sentiment to be relatively consistent and even improve in some markets. What's interesting is when consumers were polled in late March of 2020, June to August of last year was projected to be the end date. As of December, that projection was a year or more later. Simran had mentioned we were together late last March to talk about managing sponsorship in a crisis. And at that time, reviewing my deck a few days ago, we were expecting the pandemic to be behind us by September. In December, across the UK, Australia, the US, and Canada, these were the top 10 things that people were looking forward to the most in 2021. And these were unaided responses to give us a better sense of consumer mindset. Globally, there is latent demand for live events, and it's been growing. By demographics, Generation Z, people who are below about 24 years of age, are the most eager to get back to live experiences. Baby boomers, interestingly enough, are next, whereas millennials are the most cautious in perspective, followed by Generation X. This data on screen is across an average across 39 country markets. Across developed countries, we expect 50% of the population to be vaccinated by the end of June. Herd immunity, the point at which life can become much more normal, when live events at scale can become much more possible, is believed to be when 60 to 70% of the population has antibodies against the virus, either through immunization or from having endured the virus themselves, unfortunately. On average, globally, we expect herd immunity in July, with all of those who want to be vaccinated having been able to do so in September. At the various vaccination rates, we see the impact on fatalities, on transmission, on economy, and this will all impact not only consumer sentiment, but what's possible from a live event perspective. But what does that mean for global football matches, or any football matches, for musical festivals and other large-scale events? Will supply and demand meet? We believe people's physical safety will be addressed long before their psychological safety is. We expect people to re-engage in the world around them in stages, moving from their households to the safe and familiar, their neighborhoods, their communities, their regions, and so on. It's the trusted brands that can be alongside them for that journey that can find success and relevance. Now, Hannah, if we could flight poll question number 2, please. When do you think your sponsorship budgets might return to pre-COVID levels? In the next 3 to 6 months, the next 6 to 9 months, the next 9 to 12 months, beyond 12 months, or unsure? It looks like 52%, the majority of people attending, are expecting that their sponsorship budgets will return to more pre-COVID levels beyond 12 months from now. And that's certainly consistent with what we're seeing across our client base. The pandemic has been an accelerant for so many things, from digital transformation to social justice, to the very medical science that has developed the vaccines, to business automation. COVID-19 has accelerated a number of sponsorship trends, most of which were already underway. Each trend brings with it an opportunity and a risk for sponsoring brands. As sponsorship marketers, it's our task to find and leverage the opportunities. Now, in terms of trends trend number 1, the rise of local. Coming out of the pandemic, people will seek comfort in the more familiar and the more intimate. People have spent more time in their neighborhoods and in their communities and even their households than they have in generations. Supporting local businesses has become a bit of a movement. In the Northern Hemisphere, we will see another summer of the 500-mile vacation. A run on booking campsites, small, regional, easy-to-access centers will benefit from more tourism. Smaller, relatively more local events will benefit, a trend we expect to see for at least this year and next. Trend number 2, festivalization. Festivalization is a trend we were already seeing pre-pandemic. In an increasingly digital world, particularly coming out of a time period where digital platforms have been our primary place to connect and to be entertained, people, especially younger consumers, have been craving more analog experiences, and festivals provide opportunities for people to come together for human scale experiences, often centered around culture and often dynamic and experiential in nature. Trend number 3, pre-pandemic, across North America and across Europe, professional sports franchises have seen downward pressure on gate, on both attendance and on broadcast. Younger consumers are engaging with their favorite sporting events differently and in more snackable chunks. The smart sports franchises see themselves as content factories that distribute their fan experience across multiple platforms and in multiple forms. This is shifting the economics of professional sports and the value proposition for sponsors. Trend number 4, esports has benefited from larger and larger audiences through the pandemic, and as an industry has become more sophisticated in how it's organized and how it delivers value for sponsors very quickly. While still over-speculated from a rights fee perspective, larger brands are finding their way within the space. There are interesting cross-sections and intersections between esports and more traditional sports, including traditional sports athletes getting involved in esports as a means of building their personal brands and engaging with their consumers. Trend number 5, the pandemic has forced properties to build digital assets to satisfy not only sponsors, but to engage their fan bases when live in-venue experiences hasn't been possible. This presents opportunity and risk for properties and their sponsors, as when increased engagement opportunities, and their sponsors, as when increased engagement opportunities come through digital means, the lure of in-venue experiences may be less shiny. Watching from home, where one's cold beverages are close at hand, no hassles with washrooms, parking, and expensive food, may become more compelling. That said, this digital transformation is impacting in-venue experiences as well, including payment processing, crowd management, concessions management, and in-seat commerce. Trend number 6, DEI and focus on social justice experienced a seismic shift in 2020. Leagues, athletes, artists have been using their position to build awareness, start conversations, and create sustainable change. Trend number 7, consumers now look to property sponsors and are willing to penalize them for the missteps of a property. The pandemic has accelerated this, particularly around social equity. Sponsors need to be more aware of the reputational risks that come through association and be more thoughtful in how they access and manage those risks. Within the last 2 to 3 years, as part of our sponsorship evaluation methodology at Lumency, we now evaluate sponsorship opportunities for Lumency clients to include an understanding of each property's position and risks around social equity, environmental sustainability, life safety, and data security. Trend number 8. Not only are brands using their sponsorships to showcase their community investment commitments, what we refer to as tri-bonding, your brand, your for-profit sponsorship, and your not-for-profit cause partnership brought together, but brands are recognizing the importance of measuring and investing for upper funnel brand health metrics through community investment partnerships differently. CSR has moved far beyond support from your organization's foundation and beyond donations. While not the same, these partnerships are starting to look more like commercial sponsorships and are being evaluated and measured as such. Trend number 9, touchless experiences have a hygiene benefit, no doubt, but they also have a fan experience benefit. More people through spaces more quickly, creating less queuing at events, and enabling brands to have consumers use their own mobile devices for data capture in terms of experiential activations. And finally, trend number 10 in sponsorship that's been accelerated through COVID. If your organization was still letting you get away without measuring the ROI on your sponsorship investments before the pandemic, that will not be the case after the pandemic. As marketers and as marketing procurement professionals, we've spent the last 10 to 13 years getting our arms around media spend, while sponsorship for most organizations, as Simra mentioned earlier, is the number 2 marketing spend after media, has remained largely uncontrolled. That will no longer be acceptable. Hannah, if you could now flight question number 3 for us, please. Do you believe your sponsorship contracts were adequate to protect your organization from the impact the pandemic had on your sponsorship portfolio? That shows everyone, or the majority of people down the line, 47% saying that some of your contracts did protect, some didn't, but 26% saying not at all. So that's very interesting. And we will now take that off the screen. But interestingly, we always like to use what we call our paper in sponsorship agreements, so that not only is our legal team being efficient and consistently reviewing the same document, but if your contracts with sponsors aren't consistent in protecting some of the mandatories, which include indemnification, insurance, and other protections, then I would recommend you work to moving your contracts onto your paper. Now, in terms of lost value, many of us spent a good deal of our time in 2020 dealing with lost value from our sponsorship deals. A lot of time. How we in 2020 faced or dealt with lost value won't work now. It's time to evolve the approach. So let's talk about that. Lost value in 2020 came like a tsunami. The approach was what I call run and shoot, particularly between March and end of May. Very quickly trying to get our arms around lost value as it was happening. In 2020, we at Lumency, for our clients, took a bespoke approach depending on the calendar and the value gap by property. It wasn't easy to do a one size fits all, unfortunately. And so as far as possible, we took a uniform approach across sports leagues or across geographies so that we were being consistent and fair across all of the sponsorships a client might have in a particular league or in a particular music space. We looked very simply at straight line value loss. If we lost a particular weight of value in a digital space, if a particular number of events or games didn't happen, we were able to fairly quickly calculate value loss. Where we got to was a bit of a mix of refunds, roll forwards in value, and holdbacks, meaning rights fees didn't go across the table. We work with properties to find new value, and that meant often being creative on our perspective as the sponsor, but what it may exist in the property's cupboard of assets that we can access, or what can we help them create that may be new, particularly in a digital space. What was very important in our experience was to be in line early and to leverage the strong relationships we had. In an example where one of our clients wanted us to wait and one of our clients was comfortable in us going quickly, the client that wanted us to wait to sort of take a see what happens approach, there was less value available to that client with the same property because we've been able to leverage it for other clients, and other sponsors have been able to do that as well. Now, as we look towards dealing with lost value in 2021, in 2020, at least initially, we thought the impact of the pandemic was going to last weeks or months. We felt rolling forward was a viable option. So if we're in a 5-year deal and we're in year 2 of 5, let's push some of this value forward to be realized later. The impact of the pandemic is not going to be as short as we expected. It's going to be longer. Now, for the deals you had renewed within the last 12 months, it was a buyer's market, and you probably did well. For any deals you have that are multi-year and the term started before the start of the pandemic, that's a bit of a different proposition. So for existing in-term deals, still important to move quickly, meaning the property is looking to reset with all of their partners, and it's certainly much more advantageous to be first or second or third in queue, or at least at the table early. By and large, if I think about all of the discussions we had in the last year around lost value, I can't think of one instance that I'm aware of, at least. There may be those instances in our business that I'm not aware of, where we had a bad conversation. In most cases, partners were very willing to reset, renegotiate, and reconsider. And that was meaningful and somewhat surprising to me because arguably those businesses were well underwater. So not only moving quickly, but consider what value you might have already rolled forward from 2020 that now needs to be addressed. And be very comfortable to push to crack open your deal and renegotiate those rights. Protect the existing entitlements, but you may need to consider what new assets, and they may need to consider what less spend you may be willing to put into the deal. Push your property partners to be more creative in providing new assets, and where they don't have the acumen or the sophistication to do so, work with your teams and your agencies to find new ways to bring the rights to life, new ways to access the fan base, particularly in a digital context. And now is a great time to think differently about your portfolio. Many of the opportunities that have come our way in the last year have been from net new clients coming to us to say that the way they were dealing with sponsorship hasn't pressure tested particularly well during the pandemic. So now as we look to how we may structure deals differently, given the pandemic, for new and renewing sponsorships, it's time to really modernize the structure of your sponsorship deals. So when we look at how to modernize some of our deal structures, first, protection. I spent an awful lot of time swimming in force majeure language in the first part of this year. In many cases, force majeure language was inadequate. My charge to you would be not only expand your force majeure language, but also deepen it in terms of specificity. So important, the obvious would be making sure pandemics, epidemics, and communicable disease outbreaks are covered off, addressing quarantine lockdowns, and making sure some of the boilerplate force majeure language elements from before the pandemic are in your agreements. Terrorist attacks, geopolitical events, labor unrest, and labor disruption. And it's particularly important to contemplate that value loss determination in advance when you're at negotiation stage, not when it comes upon you through a crisis or some other instance. So particularly important to consider what formulas you would consider and be able to negotiate as part of that value loss determination as part of your contract negotiations. And that may be by event, by calendar, or by reach, meaning if a certain number of events or games are canceled, what will be the formula to determine that? That could be through labor disruption. Perhaps the players union is on strike. Perhaps there's a lockout. It could be by calendar if the delivery of the events or delivery of the value is across the calendar and it's equally distributed and a number of weeks, a number of days, a number of months can't be delivered, you straight line that way. And then by reach, if particularly in the digital space or the social space, if a particular number of impressions can't be delivered, making sure your formula is considered for how that loss determination is calculated in advance. Another important way to modernize or improve your deal structure is to think about flexibility differently. Now, we're big believers in value banks over hard assets. The example here would be in the social space, where if a property is guaranteeing you a certain number of Facebook posts or a certain number of TikTok integrations, it's much more flexible for you to have a value bank around impressions or around instances, particularly in a long-term sponsorship deal where pertinent social platforms in this example may not yet exist or may not be on stream. Therefore, over time, you can look at each of those value banks on a year-by-year basis and work with the property partner to plan your activation around utilizing that value bank each year rather than specific, going back to the social example, specific posts. It's also, it adds flexibility to have some convertibility against those value banks. So for example, if you have a value bank for hospitality assets, a value bank for social assets, and a value bank for hosting, perhaps, make sure you can convert some of that between banks, perhaps in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% per year. So in a given year, if you find that some of your value bank isn't necessary or not being utilized, you can do some shifting with a partner that's willing to work with you on that. Think in terms of terms differently as well. Maybe in the past you would have signed a 5-year deal. Now consider maybe a 3+1+1 or a 2+1+1. That enables you to have some flexibility on a year-to-year basis to be able to exit if the deal is no longer working for you, or there's some reason like value loss that means you're not getting what you need from the deal. This is an expensive route to take, but not a bad pull cord to have in your deals, a buyout option. Perhaps you're in an industry that may have more volatility ingrained in it. So if you have an opportunity in your deals to buy out years that you don't execute against at some sort of predetermined fee, that can give you some flexibility around getting out of deals for unforeseen circumstances. In terms of flexibility, also consider portability. Can you move the sponsorship from brand to brand or from business unit to business unit? You may be in a conglomerate that has very different lines of business. And is there opportunity where strategically relevant or important for you to move that sponsorship from category to category? The next, something we place high importance on, and for about the last 5 years, we've had really good success at shifting sponsored deals to variable compensation rights fee structures, where we protect our clients' downside risk against poor performance by the property or against the ability to deliver value, but we also reward the property by delivering KPIs that helps our clients' brands deliver against measurable business and brand objectives as a result of the sponsorship. So not only pre-considering this, but making sure that you're going to the property with a reasonable base, and then they get some skin in the game because the performance of the sponsorship against your objectives means they have more opportunity on the upside. And as I've said, protecting your downside. This isn't as easy as it sounds. It tends to be determined on how successful you can be in variable compensation around the competitiveness of the category for that particular sponsorship. And the ability for you to add value in other ways, which could include promotional benefits through your channels as well. Now, before we move to Q&A, and I'm looking forward to some great questions, as you're thinking about how you manage your sponsorship investments as we come out of the pandemic, we're pleased to offer WFA member attendees to today's webinar a no obligation, no cost 30-minute consultation with us. If it would help with an issue you're grappling with, including with the way forward, my email will be included in the soft copy of the document that will be shared after the webinar. So please reach out. I'd be happy to hear from you. Simran, how's our Q&A looking like?
Hi, Ian. That was really good. That was really good. Preparing for what we have tomorrow. As you said, as a lot of the respondents, a lot of the participants in the call said they were unsure of a lot of things about when their budgets are going to come back to normal, about what to expect in tomorrow. So I think some great tips there, and thank you for that. We're asking all of our participants to enter questions, but before, just to warm up the session a little bit, I'm going to ask you a question that I thought was really, really relevant.
Yeah.
And one of the trends that you spoke about was, and in fact, it was the last trend where you said, measure, measure, and measure.
Mm-hmm.
So, in one of your previous sessions, you said that there was absolutely no one size fits all, and there is no real KPI to measure success when it comes to sponsorships. But in the new normal, if there were some kind of tips or measures that you had to kind of give us and the audience, what do you think they would be?
Yeah, great question. Measurement is probably the number one topic on the minds of sponsorship professionals and procurement professionals now, particularly in sponsorship. There is no one size fits all, but it's really important to measure what matters for your brand and for your category. And that's going to vary if you're a banking institution versus an airline versus a CPG company, that's going to vary. So it's important to measure what matters for you. And it's important to distinguish the difference between outputs and outcomes. It's very easy to measure audience size, attendee numbers, reach, social media reach. That's fairly easy to measure, but that's not really the measurable impact on your business. The measurable impact on your business is brand health changes in belief and behavior about your brand by your target audiences, and footfall to retail, shopping, likelihood to recommend. Those are measurable outcomes that you should be measuring against. And each sponsorship is going to have a different set of objectives against it. Not each sponsorship is going to address all of your objectives. So important to understand what objectives you're looking to achieve through the sponsorship and tag your measurement back to the objectives.
Thank you. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think kind of leads me to the second one, really, with sustainability being after everybody has gone through the pandemic and whatever that we've gone through in the last 2 years, I think the mindset has moved to more sustainability. Sustainability is top of mind for everybody. And how do you see sustainability in the sense being factored into sponsorship investment and activation? And if so, how? Is anything going to change?
Yeah, also a great question. Whether it's sustainability or social equity is another important area. It's important for brands to understand what the position of their property partners are in that space, and what is the difference between that position and your position. And is there a delta there where there creates an opportunity for risk? Might consumers call you out for, as I said in this presentation, the sins of the property? So first, important to understand what the sustainability position is of the property, and then how might you be able to influence the property coming to a better place from a sustainability perspective or a social equity perspective that is more in line with your position. And then lastly, how can you use the property and the activation opportunities that afford to you in ways to demonstrate your brand's commitment to sustainability, be it environmental or to social equity. Consider it a platform not only to tell your story, but to connect with consumers in that context.
Yeah. And we've got a question from one of the participants, and they said they were not very clear what you meant by festivalization.
Mm.
So, do you mean that it's going to be little or no on-ground festivals, and what other forms of festivals should we expect to see in the new normal?
Thank you for that question. Festivalization is a term I didn't create, but it calls out an important point that it may be not all that clear. Festivals, be they agricultural festivals, community festivals, arts festivals, have seen a rise in the last 3-5 years in most geographies. And my belief is that because we live in an increasingly digital world, consumers, particularly younger consumers, are looking for live uh, analog experiences. And festivals offer an opportunity to come together with other people around a cultural moment. And they also offer a dynamic way to engage. So a festival might have a food aspect, an entertainment aspect, and it's very participatory. You can involve yourself in the experience, and you're not just there as a spectator, you're there as a participant. So we found that festivals have become more important, growing in importance, but also a growing focus area for sponsors. Larger attendance numbers, more sophisticated properties delivering different kinds of experiences for consumers. So that's what we mean by festivalization, meaning the not only the size and number of festivals in the music space as well has grown, but the importance as a place to connect with consumers for brands has grown. And given the pandemic's limitation on all of us to connect with others, we see as part of the rise of local festivals becoming a much more important place for people to come together as they reintegrate with the world around them.
Yeah, and I think with everybody being in lockdown, I think that's something like you said, everybody's looking forward to getting back to normal, to going out there within safe parameters and just getting out there. Yeah,
We're social animals, and
totally.
I think if this had been in a different era, the fact we're all connecting today while we're all sitting in our spare bedrooms, our living rooms, our kitchens is incredible. We couldn't have done that 10 or 15 years ago. And that's meant the context of the pandemic has been easier on us, but it doesn't mean it has been easy. We've all been missing the opportunity to sit with our friends and family and enjoy a meal, to go and see things and go and explore the world. I can't imagine how difficult it is for a younger consumer in their early 20s when they're at a stage of life where they're discovering the world and they've been unable to do that. So the latent demand that we've seen, particularly with younger consumers, has been tremendous, where they are past ready to get out there and explore the world. And sponsorships, particularly festivals, again, local, are going to be a really important way for people to do that, to come together as tribes and to come together and have shared experiences.
Yeah, and totally, Ian. And there are loads of questions coming in, Ian. So brace
Excellent.
yourself.
Yeah,
I
excellent.
Yeah, I think there's another one that says, regarding the consumer experience, most value asset for brands, you think that the digital platform should be considered as the new normal and can work hybrid in the future with the real experience, or is it just a pandemic situation? I think,
Yeah, that is a great question. I think it's accelerated the importance of digital. If you think about a way a fan, an attendee, a guest, a patron engages with a sponsorship property, and again, sponsorship is powerful because there's an emotional context between the consumer and the property. They have a passion point connection to the game, the what's happening on stage, the art, the cause. And that's why it's a powerful place for brands to go, not only to connect with consumers, but to be able to demonstrate their brand values. So the the change in the way consumers are engaging with those things that they're passionate about has become more fractured and more splintered. But that there's opportunity and risk there, meaning it's no longer simply I can go to the match and I can watch the match on broadcast. I now can engage with my team, its players, in a much more intimate context through social and digital. And the pandemic has meant that the live has not been possible, so the importance of digital and social has been more important. That will sustain, and that means the habit of the fan and how they connect with those properties has changed for good. So digital certainly is not going away by any means, but it's become more important. And I think also it's become more than just a pipe. We've become much more creative in what happens in the digital context and happens in the social space than we were before. It's not simply about impressions. It's not a tonnage proposition anymore.
Thank you, Ian.
Mhm.
We've got some comments, not only questions, we've got some comments from the attendees who have said, thank you, Ian. It's a great session. So awesome.
Thank you. Thanks
Uh,
so much.
The question here, there is one which relates to long-term deals which were signed before 2020, so naming rights. Do you see the contrast polarization between brands wanting to renegotiate and reduce risks and investments versus properties needing stable financial support more than ever now? Any tips to balance these opposing forces?
Yeah, that's a great question also. And it's got a nuanced answer. So if you are, the way we approached the long-term deals that we had in our clients' portfolios over the pandemic was, we've been here for a long time. We intend to be here for a long time. Let's be good partners. So that was the context of the conversation. We didn't want to bankrupt anybody. We wanted to recognize that there's value in us demonstrating to the fans of that property that we're there and supportive, and we're there in the good times, we're there in the bad times, which gave us some activation opportunities. So when we talked about value loss, we were being, we came from a position of partnership. We still needed to drive value back to our businesses as sponsors, but we wanted to make sure we were taking a partnership approach. But if we look at long-term deals, the time frame for what is long-term has shrunk. A naming rights deal, as an example, tended to be a 15 or 20-year proposition. Naming rights meaning you put your name on the building, typically. You might put your name on the festival, you might put your name on the event series. That's much less of a complex proposition, but you're putting your name on a building in a classic naming rights deal. And really, there's only three reasons you want to do that. One would be you're in a category where top of mind awareness really drives consideration. You're in a category, or you have a geographic reason to have a name rights deal, meaning you're a large employer, a large taxpayer in that jurisdiction, or you have an awareness problem. So you might be a new brand to a geography, or a brand that's struggling in terms of awareness. Those are really the three reasons to do naming rights deals. But if you consider the fact that a 15 to 20-year commitment for a naming rights deal means that you're removing flexibility for your brand to shift and adjust against priorities that may come in the future. So naming rights deals, I'm always hesitant to recommend unless one of those three needs can be addressed. And if you're looking at any deals that are longer than 3 years, that again makes flexibility for your brand and your strategy a little more constrained. So having said that, if you're looking at long-term deals, you've been there for a long time, you intend to be there for a long time, you really need to go back and look at reopening that deal and working with your partner to say, what can you offer me in the next in the term to go, and how can we reconsider how this value proposition works, which might likely include spending less.
Okay. There are a few more. I'm going to bundle two questions, Ian.
Yes.
And one of them actually talks about, uh, do you have tips, a few tips to engage with people digitally, as it seems more difficult to engage digitally rather than in person? That's one part of the question. And I'll bundle another one here where it says, should we expect more live festivals in 2021? And what should the investment split be between live and online events? So basically, how do we engage with people today?
Mm.
And moving forward, should we expect live events? And if yes, what should the split be of it? Sorry, investment split be between live and online events?
Yeah, thank you. Uh, that really, I'll answer the last question first. It really depends on the category that you're in. There are some categories where virtual events aren't really adding a lot of value. They can be expensive if it's an event that a property is managing or running, and they're bringing an audience with them. That's one notion. But if it's an event that you're creating and you need to go and find, buy, rent an audience, that can be challenging in terms of driving results. So that said, we expect live events, depending on the geography you're in, to come back in a meaningful way starting in September. There will be live events this summer in the Northern Hemisphere, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, but they'll be delivered very differently. Smaller audiences, drive-in will be much more significant again this year. So that's sort of pre-September, post-September. But even as we said earlier, post-September, even if consumers are physically safe going back to events, be it sporting events, music events, other live events, will they be comfortable doing so? So making sure that you're working with your property partners to really create the proof points against safety, and are there ways for your brand to get attribution for some of those proof points, and ensuring consumers feel safe and are safe. Sorry, I'm answering three questions when you only asked two. But in terms of the weight of live events, post-September, you're probably in a better place in terms of opportunity to connect with consumers live. Pre-September, expect to see less people, but expect to spend less to be there, and expect to be more creative in how you're there. The first question around digital, the importance of digital in the sponsorship space is making sure you're creating ownable space for your brand within the property's digital context. It's not enough just to have banner ads or logo slugs or impressions. You want to be able to find ownable space. So if it's a web series, can we get integrated into that web series that the property is producing? What is going to engage consumers and be memorable, the fact that you were there and part of it as a brand. And then if you're looking at building co-branded content with property partners, it sounds counterintuitive, but make sure the content resides on their platforms that link back to your platforms, not the other way around, because you're going to get much more success from that content living on the property's social platforms, as an example, than on your own. You want to link back to yours, but you're going to find more eyeballs and more audience and more engagement on their platforms.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. This was my first session with you, and I think it was absolutely fantastic. I know we have a hard stop at the hour, and we've just got about 5 minutes to go. I think we've answered most of the questions, but in case I've overlooked any, I will make sure that we get them over to you and we answer them and send them across in load them on our website. Thank you, Ian.